Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, COVID. While Virginia gets ready to reopen restaurants, gyms, pools, and non-essential businesses at full capacity before the 4th of July, why is Montgomery County's reopening so far behind? MCPS contract with teachers union expires next week. Without a contract, will schools reopen in the fall? And the current county council is overly male and overly white. Would changing the council to 9 separate districts encourage greater minority representation? Our panel of experts will give you the inside story behind the story. We're joined by former Majority Leader of the House of Delegates, John Hurson, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher, former council member, Mike Knapp, and President of the Chevy Chase Women's Republican Club, Laurie Halverson. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. On Tuesday, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam announced that he was prepared to allow his state, including Northern Virginia, move into phase 3 of reopening on July 1st, which would permit bars, restaurants, and non-essential retail operations to operate at full capacity, provided physical distancing measures were followed. Wow, what a difference for a state that lagged behind Maryland in the initial phases of reopening. But this leads to the question of how far behind Virginia or Montgomery County in the state of Maryland? John, the current rate of infections in Montgomery County are at 5.1%. Whereas in Virginia, that state is testing positive at a slightly higher rate of 6.2 for the state at large and 7.7 just in Northern Virginia. So why is Virginia lagging so far behind?
So Casey, I think you've raised a good point, but I will tell you that I actually think the indications in Montgomery County are ticking up a bit. You know, I think this is all science that we have to listen to. We have to listen to the CDC and what their recommendations are. Fortunately, some people would say, or unfortunately, other people would say, there is no national strategy about opening up. It's like everybody is in their own world and they can open up when they want. And that's true in Maryland too. I mean, Governor Hogan has opened up a lot of states, but he's given the local jurisdictions the right to keep it where it is. And, you know, they're going to make their own decisions. I'm not sure that's the best way to go.
But it's particularly here in, you know, where we're so close to Northern Virginia, just across the Potomac River.
And the district.
When you hear that Virginia counties are opening up and they're allowing 75% occupancy in restaurants at a time when we are less than 50. When you hear that they're going to expand from 50 people to in large groups to 250, it's very difficult to compare what's going. I mean, we can understand that there are things that are different in North Dakota and in California and in New York, but it's harder when they're in your backyard to make those comparisons. We just don't have that understanding.
I would just point out that I think it's easier if you make these comparisons with a national program of how you do this, and there just isn't one. And I think the fact that, you know, Montgomery County is going slower than other local jurisdictions is kind of the thing that we've been allowed to do. Now, I actually think, you know, I'm seeing a lot of restaurants in Bethesda and Silver Spring open up again. You know, they have, downtown Bethesda has all these chairs out in the street. They've closed off a couple streets. So people are actually getting out and doing stuff. So I don't really think it's that bad, but I don't think it's helpful that we don't have kind of a national system.
Yeah, let me push back on that. I think this is a great example of really where federalism makes a lot more sense. You're right, different states have taken different approaches, and we have the advantage to be able to see how that works out. As Casey mentioned, Maryland has taken a more, how shall I say, restrained or restrictive approach, but other states have gone in a different direction. the key metric that I think we should be watching is not the percentage that test, because that's also a function of how many people you're testing, but the key metric is the hospitalization number. And that is encouragingly in Maryland and in Montgomery County is dipping down. And that's really what why we did this to begin with, was to keep the hospitals from not being overwhelmed.
But I think you can see when you look at Texas and you look at Florida and you look at these other states that opened up wildly, there's a new spike.
It's interesting. There's a spike, but depending how long you assume people have the illness, if it's say 3 weeks, if it's not, the number of people who have it isn't doubling it every 3 weeks or 2 weeks, it's less worrisome. When it goes beyond that, then that becomes a challenge.
All right, well, let me go to Mike on this, because the brunt of the shutdown has been felt by small businesses, the so-called non-essential businesses. And Mike, you served 2 terms in the county council. If you were still in office, looking at the data and the science, would you be pushing to reopen faster to allow those non-essential businesses to reopen?
Sure, and in addition to having been a council member, I've run my own business for the last 8 years too, so I get that sense of urgency as a small business owner. I think one of the challenges that everyone is confronting is we've kind of set this up as a binary choice that we're open or closed, and I think we've got to be able to move away from that. This is a lot of things. It's about science, it's about health, it's about people, it's about business and the economy, and those have to be taken into account. And unfortunately, we tend to be having a lot more of a political discussion as opposed to looking at those real factors. And I think the biggest challenge that I would be encouraging people to do is, how do we provide the right tools to open up businesses as fast as we can to keep people safe? And I think those are the 2 pieces. If we can come up with a way to do that and be able to monitor and ensure that we're not putting people at undue risk, get businesses open as quickly as we can with those right tools in place. And I don't think it's either or. It's trying to find that sweet spot and be able to have the resources to do the testing and keep monitoring hospitalizations, but to be able to make sure that businesses can open, but with some guidelines.
Yeah, well, but isn't this the issue? And Laurie, I want to go to you on this. Is that we Governor Hogan came out with a roadmap to reopening, which, you know, in hindsight looks, you know, that it may have missed the mark, because it says that we aren't going to go into phase 3 until there's a vaccine available or effective therapeutics agreed upon. Well, that's going to be a lot further down the road. And for the small businesses and the economy of the state, we need to reopen now to allow those businesses to survive. I hear a lot from my small business clients about how difficult and how hard it is for them to just keep hanging on.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the original goal, which was to flatten the curve, I think we've shown we can do that. I'm very impressed with the companies that when I go to get my hair done or I go to the restaurant, and they're all doing such great things and taking really big precautions. I don't know how the plexiglass industry is able to provide all that plexiglass, but it's everywhere now. And oh yeah, I got it at the Home Depot. Like, they're able to get what they need to make people safe, and they're going to do that because they know people will come to their business if they're taking precautions. So there's an incentive for them to do well. It took 15 years to develop the HPV vaccine. It could be that long for this vaccine as well. We can't wait that long. Maybe we'll have a year. Maybe it'll be ready in a year, but even then, when I was involved with the Health Council, when I was a PTA leader as a health and safety chair, and when the H1N1 pandemic in 2009 was going on, they had a vaccine, but guess what? They ran out of it when they were in the middle of giving it to students in schools for free. And I was part of that, trying to get the vaccine. Why isn't it available? And, we're going to have issues with that. And when one does come out, it's not going to be 100% effective. So, we can't just rely on a vaccine. That's not a real solution.
I want to segue into, since we're talking about the economy and the Montgomery County economy. Mark, the county is facing a $600 million shortfall, all related to the pandemic. Where is the county going to find the money? I mean, County Executive Mark Elrich said as much this past week when he says he's looking for ideas.
Well, I know Mike will probably give me the precise percentage, but roughly 80% of the budget is personnel costs. So there's not a lot of ways to be able to cut without, frankly, fewer people. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with the unions in terms of increases and what have you. But in a personal service heavy budget, as we do have in local government, that's really where the change will take place.
So, Mike, right now there's ongoing negotiations between MCPS and the teachers union, and then the contract, the 3-year contract expires on June 30th. There doesn't seem to be a lot of movement at this point, and it seems pivotal that if schools are going to reopen in the fall, that a contract needs to be entered into. Is there going to be any relief that the union is going to give the county on some of the cost issues?
Well, I think Mark raised the right point. Is now is the time when you have organizations that have to start working together. Unfortunately, this is the time that MCEA chose to go back to a more traditional approach in how they're doing their union negotiations, and really was just providing options or putting something out, as opposed to taking a more unified, shared accountability approach, which they took up till this year. And if there's any time that we should be looking at new and innovative ways to figure out how to, as government and our workforce, to come up with creative solutions, now is exactly the time. And I think the union is going to have to come up with a different approach, because quite honestly, we've got to start putting different tools in the hands of our teachers to be able to effectively meet the needs of our students going into the coming year. It's going to be a shared hybrid system. If we're all going to be back in school, even if they're all in the same place, it's going to be done differently. And so the longer that it takes the union to kind of reorient itself and work more closely with MCPS to get to a solution, we put our students and our teachers at risk. And I think that forces them to do something as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think the dilemma facing many people or facing government is we're not sure as to what the safety issues are going to be. I think Laurie touched on that in her answer, because we're not sure whether or not you're going to be able to have in-person classes or not. I noticed Fairfax County issued a roadmap just the other day that gives parents the option of either sending their kid to school on a 2-day-a-week basis and 3 days of online learning or not. So it's going to be an issue that seems to the county will have to address. One of the other things that strikes me about this council is that we're still issuing proclamations where they've announced that they're going to spend several $1 million for the reopening of art centers and art organizations, and then another several $1 million for nonprofit organizations. Is this money that's being wisely spent by the county council at this point? Isn't this just sort of giving something to your support groups that have supported you in the past, but isn't really necessary?
Well, I think that you've got a real challenge, because so many of these organizations, which are the lifeblood of our community, in addition to our businesses, are teetering on the edge. Black Rock Center for the Arts is right around the corner, and they've canceled all of their classes. I mean, none of the arts organizations work on large budgets in the first place. And so the question is, if we're going to spend those resources, if you're going to give $3 million, who do you give the $3 million to? Is there a way to assess which organizations are healthier and will continue to thrive if you can get them those resources, and which, quite honestly, won't have the resources to survive even if you gave them a little bit more right now? And I think that's the challenge, is not just to give out the money. I think we want to keep our arts organizations, our nonprofits, our businesses, as many of them operational as we possibly can, but don't just give them to everybody. You've got to have some type of assessment that allows you to see who can actually use it and continue on to the next level, I think.
But as we're seeing with the relief in federal funds and other grants, there's such a lag time between when the grants are being made available and the receipt of the grants that you're not sure whether or not the funds are going to be received in a timely fashion that'll help you get over the hump. I think that's the distressing thing that I see with federal programs and state programs and county programs, is that ultimately that money comes in and it's too little and it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, can we address that?
I was going to say, I mean, we're faced with some staggering choices. You set it up at the outset with the $600 million. That is a massive cut, a reduction in the cost. It can't be met with taxes. We can't respond as quickly. We're faced with some very difficult choices. At the federal government, we've managed to expand the deficit. State and local governments don't have that option, and that is going to be a real hard challenge.
Well, it's about a fifth of our budget. I mean, that's,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
in real terms, it's a fifth of the budget. And that's, you know, that's a big leap and a big expanse, especially when, you know, there will probably be a pushback if there's a suggestion, as we suggested earlier this year, that real estate taxes are going to go up. So I think this is, you know, something we have to look at. Now we're about to wrap up the segment, and when we come back from this short break, we're going to be joined by Wheaton activist and chairperson of 9 districts for MoCo, Kim Persad, to discuss the proposed change to the county charter to change the county council to 9 council districts, from 5 regional districts and 4 at-large seats to 9 council districts. You aren't going to want to miss this. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Is the current makeup of the county council providing equal and diversified representation to the 1 million residents of Montgomery County? Well, that's the question being posed by advocates for a progressive change to the county government. To discuss this issue, we're joined by former council member Mike Knapp and Kim Persad, a Wheaton activist and president of the group 9 Districts for MoCo, which is seeking to change the composition of the county council from 5 separate councilmanic districts and 4 at-large seats to 9 separate districts, thereby giving minorities a greater voice in county representation, which is heavily stacked towards the lower parts of the county where the county executive lives, as do 7 of the current council members. So Kim, let me start with you. The current makeup of the county council has only been in place since 1990. What's wrong with the current structure?
There's a lot wrong with the current structure. First of all, we have population growth. In 1990, we had 700 residents with majority living down county. Now in 2020, we have over 1 million people with 70% living up county and 30% living in the down county area. And then our districts are too large. We have District 1 that runs all the way from the DC line to the Frederick line. And then it fails to provide proportional representation. Council member Navarro once said in an interview, you know, when she was asked, how does the county council determine where the money is spent? And her response was, it depends on who's sitting at the table. Well, guess what? You have 7 of the 9 council members living in the down county area, and they're making decisions on our public services, our transportation, our housing, development, taxes. So basically you have council members who live in an area with only 30% of the population making decisions for everybody.
Well, let me go to Mike on this, because Mike, you served 2 terms on the county council, and you were from District 2, and you had a set representation, what, of about 180,000 residents at the time. Did you ever feel like your district wasn't fully represented by the council?
Well, candidly, to Kim's point, it was a challenge. I was one of 2 council members that lived north of Rockville. And so if there was an issue between Silver Spring and Rockville, all of my council member colleagues saw it on the way to work and all knew what they'd just seen. If there was something north of Rockville, I was generally the only person that knew what that was and had to be able to explain it to the rest of them. And so it was often very difficult to be able to make people aware of what the situation was and why things were important to the up county that may not necessarily have been as important to somebody in Silver Spring or Tacoma Park. That being said, once I got better at my job, I realized there were 4 folks who were at-large folks who ultimately needed voters from the up county to support them. And so I could, on good days, be able to bring them up, show them the issues, and ultimately get 5 votes because I could convince the 4 of them why it was an important issue. And so it allowed me to take that bigger view, to have everybody coming together, get 5 votes to address an up county issue. And so there's part of that where...
Mike, but isn't that the problem? Is that you need 5 votes, but 7 votes are in this, what they call the down county crescent, from Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Tacoma Park. Plus the fact right now, our county executive is also from Tacoma Park.
Oh, no, I agree. I think that's a significant challenge, and I think it's really hard. And I think I think the flip side of that is to have 9 independent places so you have nothing that unifies them also makes that a challenge as well. One of the things I think would be interesting to be look at maybe more of a hybrid system that increase, and I'm not looking for increase in council members because I know the additional cost that provides to our taxpayers, but to look at maybe 1 or 2 seats or 3 seats that allows you to add maybe 1 more at-large member and 2 more districts to be able to increase that representation, ideally diversify that to some degree.
So
The
Kim, I'm
problem
sorry,
with
we're
that-
kind of running out of time here. So I want you to touch just on the big picture issue and whether or not the change would add greater diversity in the minority population if we made the switch.
Well, here's the problem is that the at-large political structure in its very existence is based on denying fair representation. So, you know, it's in the, and then on top of that, you have the parochial mindset that's exhibited in the county council now. And you see that and reflected in how they spend their money. You have M83, which was the highway in Up County, and it's been on the books for 50 years. And down county, we have, you know, the metro system, we have the Purple Line that's debacle, we have the Silver Line Transit debacle. Everything is focused down here. It was just neglecting Up County, period. As far as
I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off only because we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us today. This is an important issue. What's the next steps? What's the next step for your group?
we need to get 10,000 signatures so that we can get it on the ballot. And if you agree that you don't have a voice in Montgomery County, please go to our website, 9districtsformoco.org. That's 9, N-I-N-E, formoco.org, and sign our online petition. Thank you,
Kim. Well, stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. We're now joined by our regular panel, and leading off is John Hurson.
Thank you, Casey. It just happens to be that I was on the redistricting commission in 1990 that set up the councilmanic districts. And I'll just tell you why. I mean, we all thought that having 5 members who were, county-wide made a lot of sense. I actually think there's a good reason to change it, but I don't think you should do 9 councilmanic districts individually. Just maybe, as suggested by Mike, to kind of change the number up. And I think that kind of makes sense. It's a bigger county, a lot more people, but not eliminate at-large people. So that's my point.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I'm glad I know who to blame.
Yeah, exactly. Blame me.
Laurie Halverson, your parting shot.
Good news and bad news. I'll start with some bad news. I love crafts, and the Sugarloaf Craft Festival, the company that runs it, has shut down. So we cannot go to the Sugarloaf Craft Festival anymore, and that's really, really sad. I feel really bad for all of the craft people. Also, a good news is the Streetery is something I'm gonna go to today. I encourage everyone to get out there and go to the restaurants, sit outdoors. They have them in Bethesda and Silver Spring and probably a few other places. So visit your restaurants.
Thank you, Laurie. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Shout out to MCPS, Montgomery College, and USG, because they've all provided resources above and beyond to each of their students to support them in these challenging times and make sure they have resources for food and well-being beyond just making sure that they're taking care of them as students.
Thank you, Mike. And Mark Uncapher.
Well, following up on Kim and the 9 districts for Montgomery County, what you didn't point out is that you can sign up online. You can sign the petition online by going to their website. A process has been set up as a result of COVID that allows for that.
Thank you, Mark. And I want to thank all of you. These are difficult issues that we all have to deal with, and we're all eager to open up our economy and go back to our normal lives. Hopefully, it'll be very, very soon. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.